They're just crutch cards, and you can play them if you want. But this is not a deck that allows you to get away with making mistakes. It just mercilessly kills you whenever you make mistakes.
7 million.
7 new.
7.
Point Highlander. Hello and welcome to 7 Point Cast. My name is Liam and I'm joined by my co-host Mouse.
Hello, glad to be here.
Today we're joined by Richard O from Melbourne. Richard, how are you going?
Well, thank you. Good to be on the show.
Now, you have a bit of a spectre about you as being the really scary Storm player, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about how you first got into Magic before you got that moniker?
So I started playing Magic back in the schoolyard, way back in the late 90s, early 2000s when I was growing up. But I didn't seriously get into Magic until I had money, which was right as I was starting to finish high school. So I had cards before then, but I wouldn't say I played tournament Magic till about 2011, 2012. And I got pretty much stuck into Legacy, and then Australian 7 Point Highlander followed very soon after, since a lot of the Melbourne stores at the time also had 7 Point Highlander scenes.
And
Interesting to get into Legacy straight away. If as the first competitive format, what took you away from like standard, or I guess what at the time was like extended?
Legacy wasn't anywhere near as expensive as it was back in the day. Like I got my jewels for sub $100, except for Underground Sea was the pricey one at 100. So when I was looking at standard, I'm like, well, you have to switch decks constantly, or I can just invest. I think it was like $800 or something for my first Legacy deck. And I was like, right, well, I can play this forever. Now that wasn't strictly accurate because Legacy also changes, but getting expensive cards has turned out well for me.
Yeah,
it is a real problem. Sorry.
Yeah, I remember at the time I was maybe 2012 or something. I got like a scholarship for the particular uni degree I was doing, and it was like something like $4,000. And I was like, oh man, maybe I should just buy a playset of every jewel. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to be responsible and not do that. And what a terrible decision in retrospect that's turned out to be. But it was those were the prices back then. I was like, oh, the most expensive one's only $200 each. Like, how bad could it be? But yeah, how times have changed.
So in some ways that led me onto playing Storm, because I played. I've had a whole bunch of Legacy decks. Once you started getting some jewels, and I loved the format, and still do, but it's a bit different these days. I ended up settling on Burning Wish Doomsday, which is not the same as Doomsday today. Doomsday today is soft, because you just get like Thassa's Oracle, and you get Cavern of Souls, and you can pass the turn piles, and you can build pretty sure wins. Now, there is complexity to it, but back in the day, Thassa's Oracle didn't exist, and the deck was a Burning Wish Tendrils deck. So the only way in your whole deck that you could win was by resolving Doomsday. So you had 3 Burning Wish and 3 Doomsday, and Burning Wish could obviously find Doomsday, as well as some cool stuff. There was no Tendrils in the main deck. You had to go find Tendrils. And you had to ponder and brainstorm Top and Gataxian Probe to find the Doomsday every game very quickly, or you died. So I think that was a really good foundation for playing, Storm correctly. And that's sort of how I got into the degenerate combo side of gaming.
And so when you first started playing 7 Point Highlander, was it straight into Doomsday, or did you play other decks first?
No, I also played green Smallpox in Legacy at the time. So I first started playing Highlander with, frankly, terrible mid-range decks, sort of trying to port those ideas across with the Abyss and Nethervoid. That is not a good. It wasn't a good strategy then. It maybe is slightly better now, but I still don't think it's very good. So I switched over.
Are you referencing like Nick Fit? Am I sensing a fellow like is it Veteran Explorer with Phyrexian Tower gamer?
No, Nick Fit is more Veteran Explorer. Pox is like no creatures except for Nether Spirit, Live of the Veil, Smallpox, Life from the Loam, Wasteland, that kind of deck. So it was more like black-green Prison.
Yeah, so the actual like the games go forever and no one does anything except for I guess like Icarid or Nether Spirit or whatever, which just comes back. Any Curse Scroll action in that one?
Oh yeah, you better believe there were 3 Curse Scrolls in that deck.
Hell yeah. It's actually interesting, one of the ways you describe Storm with the no kill cons in the main, very interesting lines, as opposed to like now it's kind of turned into Thassa's Oracle. I'm wondering if this is a correct differentiator in my mind. I've always thought of Storm as kind of being like the combo deck which is not deterministic, in the sense that like a lot of combo decks, they just You have A plus B, you put them together. If they resolve, you win. But with Storm, it's almost kind of like you get started and the wheels start spinning, and sometimes it ends up in a winning position, and other times it like you can just get bad luck. And or you've made a decision incorrectly along the way, and because of that, the wheels spun off the wagon, so to speak, and that's kind of what makes it so thrilling to play, and really interesting, is that you have to really be like deep in the tank the whole time. It's not just like putting two cards together. Do you reckon that's like an accurate discriminator between Storm and other combo, or is Storm essentially just A plus B dressed up in other steps?
So to me, when I think of Storm, I think of engine-based combo. So with A plus B, you need the Thassa's Oracle and you need the Demonic Consultation, and the pieces don't do anything independently. Whereas to me, Storm is more like, well, I have all these rituals, but there doesn't have to be any specific rituals. And you've got your Yawgmoth's Will or your Doomsday, or your Doomsday is a bit different because that kind of is a one-card combo. It's just the way you win is different. So it's almost its own little separate category. But you've got your Song of Creation style decks. There's a lot of decks in Modern, for example, that are built around Song of Creation and cards like Grape Shot. So to me, that's an engine-based combo where you're doing all this stuff and it all ends in this one win condition. And theoretically, you would play 0 win conditions, which is why Burning Wish in my mind is the purest win condition, because you don't want to draw your tendrils until you're ready to win.
Yeah.
So it's like you're doing all this stuff and it all ends up with Tendrils of Agony. But there's like 10 different ways to get there, which is what makes it really interesting. Whereas the interesting bit with, your Splinter Twin style combos as well, let's get the pieces and find a window for the pieces. But the actual combo is kind of easy. Storm, it sort of all blends together beautifully.
So tell me, in terms of evaluating Storm versus these other combo decks, like what is the draw? Is it just like the experience of playing is just more enjoyable, or do you think that there's some arguments to be made that Storm is like less vulnerable to particular interaction, or is it just faster? You kind of mentioned redundancy as like a potential draw.
Yeah, redundancy is the big one. You're not less vulnerable to anything because, to be honest, everything interacts with you that interacts with combo. Like, you lose to many, many different hate bears. Discard's good against you. Counterspells are good against you. But the deck has enough raw power and redundancy that you can power through everything, which is why I love it. So it's all around the micro decisions you make with, how can I play around these cards? What order do I sequence my spells? And it's really just this giant percentage machine where every correct decision increases your percentage to win a little bit. And if you mess up, you lose a lot of percentage. So I love that kind of thing. But it's not for everyone. You do have to play a lot. And because it's really complicated, it's really, really easy to die. And it's entirely your fault.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, Liam, do we want to head over to start having a look at some of Richard's lists?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Richard, you sent us a breakdown of action, protection, and mana. Do you want to take us through these key pieces?
Sure. Yeah, so we start with, I guess, the sort of common themes that sit across most decks. Because, every deck's a little bit different. It all depends on the metagame. Because I change the deck a lot depending on the metagame. And obviously, the points list. The points list has changed a lot since I started playing.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the mainstays of the deck are your Doomsday, Yawgmoth's Will, and then you've normally got another engine as well. At the moment, it's Tinker, because Tinker's only 1 point. At 2 points, which it's normally been, Tinker's a lot less exciting. So Doomsday used to get Gush, which was amazing. When you could combine Gush with Doomsday, you could do some really broken things. You can generally win with Gush as long as you can draw a card. Sometimes you need 1 mana, which is really efficient, because Doomsday's 3, your Ponder or whatever's 1, and you might need 1 more mana. So it's, 5 mana, self-contained, win the game. And then there's a whole bunch of complicated stuff you need to do to get to the tendrils. Doomsday's almost...
If I could just jump in, just for those who haven't played necessarily with these cards before, that like the reason the Gush, correct me if I'm wrong, is so important, is that Doomsday, while it creates the stack of 5, doesn't draw you any cards. But if you've just got like a free draw spell like Cycling Street Wraith, playing a Gitaxian Probe, and you've got Gush as the top card, which you're in control of because you've cast the Doomsday, Gush draws 2 more cards for free. And if you haven't played a land, it even can sometimes give you a mana back. So that you really get to see all of the pile and assemble the win condition all at once. And so I'm right? Like that is why the Gush makes the Doomsday just like a completely different machine.
Yeah, I should probably explain a bit how Doomsday works in Tendrils, because it's a little bit different from Thassa's Oracle. So once you Doomsday, you generally have to win that turn. There is spots where you can Doomsday past the turn, but because you're counting to 10 with Tendrils, and Doomsday exiles all cards except for 5, there is like tricks you can do with Yawgmoth's Will and Top and all sorts of things. But in general, you much prefer to win that turn, and also it works because then you don't die to untap, have a counter spell up. So because of that, once you Doomsday Ponder, you generally have no mana because you've used all your rituals to cast the Doomsday. So you really need to get 2 cards, because if you can draw 2 cards, then you can draw, say, Lotus Manamorphose, which the Manamorphose then draws Will. Then you can use the Will to recast the Lotus in the Manamorphose, and then draw Tendrils, which is like you need 1 mana floating before you go into that pile, for example. Or you can go like Gush, get 2 islands back, and do what was a cool pile back in the day. You can use like Nostalgic Dreams to discard the 2 islands that you got back with Gush to like double regrowth for a 1 mana less Yawgmoth's Will, which 1 off 0 mana floating. But if you can only draw 1 card, you generally can't win unless you have tons of mana floating. So if you have 2 mana floating, you can use one of the 2 mana draw 2s to break into a pile. But Gush is just by far the cheapest draw 2 to have ever been printed in Magic for obvious reasons. That card's busted. But these days, Gush is 2 points, so your Doomsday has to work a little bit harder. So it's a lot more of using cards like Ren's Resolve, Predict, Night's Whisper, those kinds of things. But they're all fundamentally doing the same thing. They're giving you access to the top 2 cards. So you can combo, Lotus, Yawgmoth's Will, or Lotus with another draw 2 to, get the resources you need to get to that 4 mana for Tendrils. The Thoracle piles can win for less because they can use only 2 mana and you can unearth and you can do all sorts of tricks. But Thoracle's 4 points, so that's a very different deck.
And can you use cards like...
Well, you go, Liam.
Can you use cards like Thought Scour or Mental Note or Consider to put a card in the graveyard and then you've effectively drawn it if you end up using the Yawgmoth's Will?
Generally, no. There are spots where if Consider is the card you're using to draw into your pass, if you like Doomsday, then cast Consider, you can flip over the Tendrils, and that reduces the mana requirements. But you really need to hit at least sort of 3 mana for Will, or 4 mana just to cast the Tendrils, plus like cards that draw more cards. It just doesn't really work out to be like Mental Note, mill over Tendrils, whatever. Then you draw the Lotus, but you don't have the Will, so you need to have stuff in hand. I used to play more of those cards, but to be honest, Surveil Lands have kind of come and eaten the role of the 1 mana cantrips. It's really hard for me to justify Consider when Surveil Lands exist.
Can I follow up as well with, so obviously you're making a hell of a case for Gush here, but I mean, Gush is 2 points, Lotus is 4 points, that's 6. Is Gush something you are on, like with 1 more flex point, or is it just too hard to justify eating up 2 points?
In the current builds, I think Tinker, because Tinker, I'll talk about Tinker separately. Tinker does a bunch of powerful things with a bunch of horrific deck building costs, but the payoff is very high. You can't really fit Tinker, Gush, and Black Lotus. Like, yes, that's a theoretically legal spread of points, but you lose out on a lot of good cards, like Mana Vault, Urza's Saga kind of cards, which really are needed to make Tinker good. So you could build that deck, and I'm sure you could make it playable, but I think you're better off, because when you're playing Dash with Doomsday, you really become more Doomsday heavy, because a lot of the time with the current builds of the deck, which are more Tinker related, when you're casting Dark Petition, you don't get Doomsday that often unless you need to do it to play around a hate piece, because the Tinker lines are so mana efficient. So unless you're worried about them having like a Besage or something, you generally favor Tinker. But there's definitely spots you go for Doomsday. But when Doomsday with Gush is in the deck, like you're tutoring to get Doomsday, because Doomsday is the most powerful thing you can be doing.
Yeah, okay. And
so it's kind of hard. Sorry, it's kind of hard to fit all of these things in the one deck because there's so many little subtle differences in all these decks.
And so can I ask, is this a good time to maybe change gears and talk about Tinker as an alternate action thing, or is there anything else which people need to know about the Doomsday pile?
I could talk for the whole episode about just Doomsday, so let's move on.
Maybe give us the top 3. What are the top 3 things people need to know about Doomsday?
Just counter the Doomsday. If you don't understand what I'm trying to do with Doomsday, if you try and play games where it's like, I'll get them by countering the draw 2, which will win if it works, is really dangerous, because if I have the resources and I have like Ponder Preordain in hand, you can often beat a single counterspell post Doomsday. So unless you really understand Storm, just counter the Doomsday. Unless it's like some weird spot where you think you're just dead on board and like countering Doomsday is the way to win. So those spots are weird.
Look, can I as a control player on that, I would even say, even if you do understand what's going on, counter the Doomsday, because you just, in this format, you just don't know what they're Doomsdaying for. Like, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of a bunch of the different piles, but I remember one time, like, I was like, just the spread of answers in my hand were like, I've got this. But then their play was Sheldock Isle, and Hideaway Emrakul. And it's like, well, I didn't have that in mind. You know, there's always like some kind of weird niche thing which will get around. You know what you think you've got. So I 100% agree. You've just always got to counter the Doomsday.
My favorite Doomsday moment like that was I think it was a teams tournament or some tournament with like 20 people watching. It was great. I Doomsday. My opponent lets it resolve. I've cast Ponder, and they counterspell the Ponder. I respond by gushing, and then Pact of Negation from my pile onto their counterspell and win on the spot. And it was so good. So yeah, definitely counter the Doomsday. If you're picking up the deck for the first time, I would just not bother with pass the turn piles, because the pass the turn piles are kind of niche and they're also quite complicated, because you have to start thinking about, well, when I pass the turn, what happens if they draw a discard spell and take my stuff that's in my hand? Or what happens if they draw a Nihil Spellbomb? Or what happens if they draw Collector Oof? The possibility tree expands really fast. So it's better just to stick to the win on the same turn piles to start learning. And the other thing is, don't try and memorize the piles. Memorizing piles doesn't really work. Because in Legacy, it was how you did it. Like, you went through, okay, here's my 20 Ideas Unbound piles, and here's my Brainstorm piles, and here's my top piles. But because of the permutations of cards in a 4-0 format is only so deep, you could sort of brute force it. In Highlander, the things people are doing against you are wild and varied, and your deck also has so many little subtle differences. Like, I lost a game to, I think it was Billinghurst in Mana Clash. I think it was in the last round. I think we were just out of top 8. So it was just for funsies or prize money for 16 or whatever. But I made a pile that would have won in my head, except I had Arkham's Astrolabe in my hand instead of the Chromatic Sphere that I was like mentally working through, because I know it works for Sphere. And I was like, oh, I've got Snow Mana, this is fine. It just went, the way the pile worked out is I actually couldn't afford to hold that mana up until like card 3 in the pile. I forget the exact spot, but you have to, it's kind of complicated because you have to take mental shortcuts, because it's really hard to brute force all this stuff. But the mental shortcuts will also kill you because there's subtle differences. There was another spot in, I think last night in VFN, where I made a Doomsday pile and was like, oh no, I was going to draw into my pile with Seek the Beast, like the flip side of Questing Druid.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, this doesn't work, because in this spot, which is normally Ren's Resolve, I can Yawgmoth's Will to flash it back. So I had to rethink my pile on the spot. Everyone's on the stream laughing at me because I'm like, why are you taking 5 minutes to resolve your Doomsday? I ended up figuring it out, build the pile, and then as I click the 5 cards on Magic Online, I'm like, oh, I haven't put Tendrils in this pile. That's not ideal. But I have my hand Burning Wish, so I'm like, okay, well, I've picked the 5 cards, but I haven't stacked them on Moto yet. So I had to build an Empty the Warrens pile for 22 goblins, which still killed them, which was extremely badly played of me, but scoreboard.
Yeah, still look, Death by Goblins, it gets people. In terms of like niche ways to interact with Doomsday piles, because sometimes, you know, if you're on the other side of the matchup, you're struggling to find anything which can interact in any way. Just imagine a situation where you're just a blue deck. You know, you might be Prowess, you might be Grixis, you might be Control, and you've just got like a Thought Scour in your hand, and that's it. That's all you've got. So you're watching the Stormplay go through the motions, and they Doomsday. Is there like a best time to land the Thought Scour, or or is it just the case that a Stormplay in this position is always going to have checked first with like a Git Probe or a Dread Fugue or something, and there's never going to be a good time?
Those are the kinds of really hard questions where it depends. But let's simplify the scenario to, I have Doomsday on the stack, and you're tapped out, and you only have Thought Scour. In that spot, you would let the Doomsday resolve. I would probably wait on the Thought Scour until they put... I try and snipe the last few cards of the pile. So let them draw the first 2 or 3, and then try... What you're hoping for is the Yawgmoth's Will, and then you can dump the Tendrils in the bin off Thought Scour. Or if they're going for Thoracle, like you put the Thoracle on the Yab when they're trying to draw it. So I'd almost try and get them with a lose the game because of overdraw spot there. If it's a more mid-game spot where it's like you've Cataxia and probed them and you see they have a Doomsday in their hand, it's like, well, does this Thought Scour give me velocity so I can like get in a good position and not be in a spot where they've got Doomsday on the stack already? Which is probably ideal, but you might be like, well, I'm kind of low in interaction, let's just gamble. So
yeah,
this is where Magic gets fun, and this is where I love it, because it's like, well, that's where the skill testing part of Magic is. Like, yes, Storm can feel miserable from the other side because sometimes you just die and you feel like it's out of your control. But let me assure you, if you play a deck with counterspells and discard, there is so much Magic to be played in the Storm versus those decks mirror, and people play them really badly from experience because they're not used to it. They haven't played it.
Well, it's one of those interesting things where I feel it's almost impossible to properly evaluate how strong Storm is in the format. Because, like, for example, I always feel like I have a pretty good idea of how good something like Grixis is because there are so many people playing it. Like, the results turn out like a normal distribution like nearly every single time. Whereas with Storm, there's usually just like, you, sometimes Bassa, and like Sav back when he was doing his thing. Like I'm sure there are other notable people who I'm failing to remember in the moment. But do you know what I mean? Like there's just so few players. It's like, well, who knows if that's where the deck is at, or if they were just having a very good slash bad day.
Yeah, it's very difficult because when I'm sitting down to play someone, I've played the matchup 100 times. They've played it maybe once or twice. And I'm always playing a slightly different build, which is attacking from different angles. Like I'm somewhat infamous for bringing absolutely ridiculous sideboard cards in, like your Monastery Mentors or your Shield Druids or your Quarry Steel Cutters, whatever it is, and trying to get you.
Yeah.
So how many removal spells do people leave in? And some people, just keep in the dismembers. Some people take them all out, and there's no right or wrong, but you need to have a plan. And I think that's what's missing a lot of the times. I sit down from someone, and it's like they Inquisition me or Thoughtseize, and they've got no idea what to take. They don't have a strategy for how to attack the matchup. Like, are they taxing my mana? Are they taxing my action? Are they trying to, quickly clock me, land a threat, and do the disruption thing? Are they trying to take the game till turn 8, turn 10, and just, grind me out of resources? Because the deck does explode cards sometimes. So when people are just sort of throwing games, I understand the challenges of trying to point the deck from a committee perspective, because there's a lot of free equity you get from just sitting down and knowing the matchup much better than your opponent.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, but that's also kind of part of the fun of the format and playing like a niche deck, right? That you get that feeling of being like the rogue in the room and, getting the, that informational asymmetry, getting some advantage. And I like that. I like that a lot. But yeah, or nearly, to be honest, I don't think I've got that much information about 7 Point Highlander Storm, but certainly I used to play like, like countertop in Legacy, and like I'd lost the Storm a fair few times before I, had to learn through the motions of what's important. But yeah, no, like it's fun. It's fun having that information asymmetry. Can I ask, one of the things you brought up was the kind of sideboard duke of the Monastery Mentor, the Korai Steel Cutter, which traditionally, as I remember it, used to just be that Storm would nearly always side in 4 Dark Confidant because they were quite sure you were siding out your Swords to Plowshares, and there was that cat and mouse game between Control and Storm and Legacy. Do you think that like having that kind of sideboard duke available is like something which all decks should have, or is it just like a flavor of the month thing? Is it personal preference? What do you think?
I think if it's not in your repertoire, you're playing Magic wrong, without being overly rude about it. Like, you're not playing against a pre-board opponent anymore. You're playing against a sideboard deck, so your sideboard should reflect that. And like, I will sideboard with Storm, even if I was playing an opponent game 2. Like, regardless of their strategy, I want my strategy to change a bit. Like, the cards like Chromox are generally worse in sideboard games because the opponents are going to be more interactive. So it's less about just blitzing over them with speed, which is kind of the game 1 plan, right? You just kill them. Game 2 is a lot more interactive, so you want more interactive cards in your deck. Like, a lot of the cards go up in value post-board, and other cards go down. So, for example, Stormscale Scion is a lot better in the post-board games because in game 1, they've still got all their, Doomblades and the Dismembers and those sorts of cards.
Yeah.
Whereas in game 2, they don't have them. Sometimes I'll main deck Stormscale Scion just to free up sideboard space. But yeah, you've got to have room for cards like Bergie and Vivi and Shieldred and Mentor and whatever. There's like 10 different sideboard dukes you can try. You don't really want their main deck because all their opponent's removal's on. And even if your opponent knows you're doing it, they still have to take some removal out. Otherwise, they're just going to draw triple removal and they're dead. So, like, it's a sort of a philosophy. If you want to be always providing your opponent tough questions, for a couple of reasons. One, when you provide your opponents tough questions, they make mistakes. Never make your opponent's life easy. And also, like, Storm is to me the embodiment of some old Magic theory, which is, there's no wrong answer. So there's no wrong questions, only wrong answers. So you just want to say, if you don't have the quick interaction, you're going to die. If you have the wrong interaction, I might like steal a game from you. I've even boarded like Blood Moon in my Storm sideboard before, just for like, well, I might stop you playing spells and then I'll figure out some way to win. You really are just trying to shank people with free wins post-board. You don't really care how you get them.
Out of interest, like I've played against locally a dedicated Tinker Tendril Storm Doomsday type player, and his sideboard strategy is like every Black Initiative card. He's just like, oh look, I'm playing rituals and stuff anyway. I'm just gonna like run one of these out game one. Your removal is gonna be out. So turn one, your removal is not gonna be here and win like that way. Have you had any like initiative sideboard dukes?
Not recently. I did try that back in the day, back when Baneslayer Angel was more up Magic's alley.
Yeah.
The problems I found with it was you can't actually do it against the combo mirrors because they'll just kill you. It's really transparent once you're doing it because the scene isn't that big. People can scout, and if you play Baneslayer Angel in your Storm deck, everyone knows what you're doing right away.
Yeah.
And even if you don't get the Element of Surprise, you still have to get through game 3. And it sort of wrecks your deck a bit. Like, yes, you can Dark Ritual out Shieldred, whatever. And that's great when it works. But, cards like Force of Will are still universally good against you. Null Rod will still prevent you from casting the expensive spells. And the modern Magic threats are so good that, like, people will leave Barraglyph in against you because it's correct to do so. That card's just such a house. And that card can beat a lot of unfair Magic things. Like, you can lose the game really easily, and it also means you can't credibly present a combo kill anymore. So when you're like, if you're playing a combo game, you're like, I've tinkered for Citadel, and you see 6 mana creature and you play it and you lose 6 life and you just die to a bolt. That's not ideal. And you're going to start passing the turn a lot more. Like, do you sideboard Doomsday out of your deck? Probably. You have to sideboard out all the threatening combo pieces, so your deck doesn't present the same pressure anymore. Whereas I think it's a lot better to go, I can still combo kill you. Like, I've only dedicated 2 cards to this in my 75, but the threats are so high impact that they're going to kill you. So you still have to kind of respect it. I might not do it every game, but it's just another angle to your attack, but you are still primarily a Storm game plan. But that's where Magic is really beautiful as well, because sometimes the plans converge into the really scrappy sideboard games. So it's like, if Urza Sagad, I've made 2 guys, they're 5/5s. They can't kill you by themselves, but they're putting pressure on you that you have to respect. Maybe you have to drown in the lock one of the dudes, and you have to chump block with a creature, so I get 2 more turns to assemble my combo kill. Or I've hit you for 10, now I only have to tendrils you for 5. So that's where the game is really interesting, and where I think people make so many mistakes.
Yeah, I'm mindful. I'm mindful that it must have been only maybe 15 minutes ago. I was like, just give us the top 3 things about Doomsday and move on to Tinker. And now
to be fair, Richard did warn us twice that he can speak forever about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's but it is actually just such a fascinating deck. Like, there's so many layers. Tell us about Tinker though, because you one of the things which stood out to me is that and this resonated with me as like a committee member per se, is the idea of Tinker requires you to manipulate the deck in really damaging ways. And I think some people, obviously, when Tinker works against you, you don't see that. You just see it destroying you. But it might be useful to hear the other side. Like, what are the types of concessions that you're having to make to make Tinker work in the deck?
So maybe I think the clearest way to illustrate it is looking at the deck pre-Tinker, because I think I sent you many lists. So if you look at...
Liam only put in one of the lists.
Well, I have them open. So if I look at my GP 2017 deck list, it has 4 artifacts.
Right.
And my 2023 one has 6.
Yep.
If I look at my current build, which is a Tinker build, it has 12. And to be honest, 13. I'm not counting Baleful Strix. So
it's on the screen.
You've doubled the amount of artifacts to make Tinker work. And those are not what I would consider good cards. Like, some of it's okay. Like, I think Mishra's Bauble's a card that, as a Magic community, we just slept on for 10 years before we realized it should be in a lot more decks than it is, so that's fine. Lotus Petal Lines, Idamit, all fine. Chrome Mox, I've talked about how I think that card is actually quite bad in your deck that's trying to assemble a critical mass of resources. Mana Vault is good. That's one of the points I think you kind of have to play to make Tinker work. Defense Greed is 2 mana to do the job of a card that costs 1. Like, yes, it has some power to it, but I'd rather play a Thoughtseize every time. You've got Grim Monolith, which is again only in the deck for Tinker. Grim Monolith does not cast Doomsday. It doesn't cast most of the rituals in the deck. Helm of Awakening is a good card, so I don't mind Helm, but there's 4 artifacts in there that I would joyfully cut in an instant, and it also makes your sideboarding worse because you have to then leave those cards in post board when you often want to take them out. Like when you're playing against Jund, for example, you don't want Defense Grid against Jund. Yes, it hits a few of their cards, but you're like, oh, my Tinker density means I have to keep these cards in.
Yeah.
So you're trying to play, and the other thing is there's a ton of cards in Magic that reward you for playing instants and sorceries. So for example, Ral is a super powerful Storm engine that you just can't play in this deck because I need a critical massive instants and sorceries and I've got to jam these 12 artifacts in my deck. I even tried putting artifact lands in my deck to try and give me more slots, which is good, except Null Rod exists, and you can't beat Null Rod when Null Rod not only stops all your combo, but also turns off all your lands. So,
Because if you've got the lands, you can just repeal the null right end of turn and then combo off, right? Like that is a big difference.
a very big difference. I've died many times to Null Rods and Oops with the removal in my hand that I can't cast because my lands are off, and eventually was just like, I'm not about this. I will take my beatings to Tinker being bad to be more resilient in the post-ball games.
If I can like have a momentarily, like just a moment of embarrassing self-disclosure, when you were like defense grid, it's a card which costs 2 mana, which is doing the job of a card which costs 1. I'm thinking, Xanted Swarm, interesting, and then you immediately follow up with Thought Seize. I'm like, okay, I'm lost. Don't know which card we're talking about here.
Sorry, yeah. So basically, defense grid is there to beat Force of Will, and when you've got like all the mana and you're going for it, you can precast defense grid, which is fine, but you can precast Thoughtseize too. But you generally want to, if you can get away with it, play all your spells in one turn to restrict the opponent on mana as much as possible. So cards like Collarhand's Command aren't as good against you.
Yeah. Does that mean that do you hold the hand disruption spell for the turn you're going off, or is that something which you just happily like run out turn 1 if there's nothing else to do?
It depends. I'm more likely to hold the discard in game 1 because in post-ball games you often want to cast the discard early to take their hate pieces so they don't kill you because they're more annoying to deal with when they're on the board than they are in their hand, obviously. In game 1, I will often save the discard spells, especially if I know my opponent's on blue. But it's the classic, it depends. Like if I have 2, then I'll obviously burn 1 quickly. If I see my opponent like going after my ponders and stock ups and things with counter spells, I'm like, right, they're probably using their counter magic more aggressively, so I'll respond by using my discard more aggressively. But if my opponent's sitting there with 6 cards in hand and 4 mana untapped, I am holding onto that Thoughtseize for dear life.
Yeah, fair enough. Another question I had is Beseech the Mirror obviously rewards you for having artifacts. Is Beseech and Tinker, are they stapled together? Or would you run Beseech without Tinker?
Beseech is much more forgiving for a few reasons. One, Beseech can be cast for Diabolic Tutor, which sounds inefficient but is not that bad. A lot of the time with Beseech the Mirror, you're not that fussed about the bargain because you're just going and finding Black Lotus or Dark Ritual to power a will line. So that's fine. It also can sacrifice a lot more things. Enchantment doesn't sound like a big deal, but that means you can eat Urza's Saga and Carpet of Flowers, which is 2 more targets. And also it can eat tokens. So if you've got Monastery Mentor, if you've got Urza's Saga tokens, an Eldrazi spawn off a Rumble, like there's a lot more things it can eat, and it's a lot less bad when you can't eat something. So yeah, it's night and day difference. Whereas Tinker is just a dead card.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I do have a list of questions, but I'm mindful of that. Are there other things which we need to know about, like just how the deck functions before we get into like a back and forth?
I think that's the other thing about Tinker is sometimes it just doesn't work because you draw the Bolas's Citadel.
Yeah, okay.
You can put a second card in the deck, which is good, but the nice thing about Bolas's Citadel is 6 mana is overcosted, but it's not completely out of reach. I've card cast Citadel plenty of times, and it often is still good enough.
Yeah, especially with Cabal Ritual, right? Like you got the threshold, you're nearly there.
Yeah, you can get there, especially in the grindier games. Whereas a card like Sphinx of the Steel Wind, which I often sideboard, or Phyrexian Portal, is a lot harder to hardcast. And it's just a dead draw in your deck. And I really don't think you want that. So I would rather have Tinker be bad than have another dead card in my deck. And 1 card doesn't sound like much, but when you see a lot of cards like this deck does, and you'll really need that critical mass, it's such a big deal.
Do you have any thoughts about actually with like, because I'm noticing about, unlike other dedicated Tinker Citadel lists, which run a lot more like top of library manipulation, and their mana costs on average like a lot lower than yours. How big of a liability is it the fact that you're just running like 4 and 5 drops in this deck, as opposed to like those dedicated decks?
It doesn't matter that much. Like you do need about 10 life to win with Citadel, or generally it's quite difficult. The thing is, most of the 5 drops just kill them. So if you cast Dark Petition, they're just dead. Right. Because you can just go get Tendrils, and if you want, you can gain life, or you can get Will, or you can get Doomsday. Stormscale Silence probably the most awkward, and I sort of touched on that's kind of not a great main deck card, which is in this build, but sideboard space is at a premium. Most of the expensive stuff has the decency to kill them, so it's not too big a deal.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, is there anything else we need to know about how the deck functions? I mean, like for I assume that people are picking up on the context. Like Storm is very much you play mana and you use the mana to get cards and you use the cards to make more mana and you kind of rinse repeat until you get the Doomsday Pile or the Citadel and then it's a kind of as we've described. But are there any other kind of like nuances which people need to know about how this deck functions?
I'll refrain from nuances because I'll be here forever again, but I think we should touch on Yawgmoth's Will. That's probably the other big engine card of the deck. So Yawgmoth's Will is kind of like the last man standing. You trade resources back and forth, and then you play Will with 10 cards in your graveyard, and you should be able to figure out a way to win, or just, draw 4 cards with Yawgmoth's Will. So yeah, they're probably the cards you tutor foremost. Tinker, Yawgmoth's Will, and to a lesser extent Doomsday, because there's no Gush.
And for those who don't know, Yawgmoth's Will is 3 mana, and you can play cards from your graveyard, so lands, artifacts, everything included. So it's much better than Past in Flames in that regard. But everything goes into exile after it's been cast.
Yeah, Past in Flames, in my opinion, is effectively unplayable in Highlander, unless you're in an all-in instance and sorcery build, like Mono Red Storm is more built that way. In this deck, with all the artifacts from Tinker, you being play a land is very important. Sometimes the creatures come in post-board. Yawgmoth's Will is so much better than Past in Flames. It's not even close.
Okay. Cool. I mean, are there any like actually how bad is it, for example, like when what am I talking about? Of course it's awful. Like if you like Yorg Will and then they just endurance you on the spot or something, is it just lights out or is there still room for like rebuilding?
It's kind of like everything with Storm. If a hate card comes and you're not prepared for it, you're probably dead. So yes, that has happened many times in my life. Endurance in response to Yawgmoth's Will is what we would call perfectly timed. And you generally die. Because it's not just you spent 3 mana. You've generally crafted your game plan around it. You've burned some rituals to put Yawgmoth's Will there. You've, pondered away other ways to win. You've put Yawgmoth's Will on the stack. You've cleared the way with, well, I guess, not Thoughtseize in this case, but maybe you've, Veil of Summit or something that doesn't stop specifically Endurance. And then you die. So, but if you can see it coming and you Taxian Probe early, then you craft a different game plan. And that's where the game is played. It's like, well, how do I set up this win that doesn't die to their hate? But if it happens and you're not ready, you're dead.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, one other thing, I'm just like looking at the list. There are other 2 mana impulse cards, right? Other than Reckless Resolve and Ren's Resolve. These are obviously the gold standard because you get to play both of them and at the end of your next turn. But there are other ones which you could just play them this turn, which if you're storming off isn't so big of a deal. Likewise, stock up. Like there are other 3 mana cards which see a lot of cards, right? Like you've got your Brain Surge and the like. What is the kind of, I guess, discriminating feature which makes these ones playable but the other ones just not worth it?
So Ren's Resolve and Desperate Ritual are really Doomsday combo cards. They're the best way of drawing cards with Doomsday for a couple of reasons. One is they don't get Bowmastered. Another one is they work really nicely with LED because you're setting up your cards perfectly. LED just becomes Black Lotus, which is nice. Night's Whisper also works, but you don't have a lot of life to work with post-Doomsday. And you do want to be able to cast the card on turn 2. Like I have played Questing Beast and I still am messing around with it, but it's clearly worse at drawing cards. The benefit is you get the body. So yeah, Reckless Impulse and Ren's Resolve are really nice with Doomsday, is what pushes them over the edge. And Stock Up is just the best way to draw more cards. I have played Brain Surge. It's slightly worse than Stock Up, in my opinion. So, even though it does have some nice synergy with Bolas' Citadel.
I'm looking at the sideboard now, and there's the heresy of having Mental Misstep in the sideboard. But apart from that, there are 2 other Storm spells, Grape Shot and Empty the Warrens. Could you explain why you put those ones in the sideboard and not in the main board, and when you would side those cards in, if at all?
So Mental Misstep is a product of it's heinously bad.
I was just joking about Mental Misstep. you don't.
It is a card that gets better post board because that's when your opponents bring in all their blasts and Veil of Summers and Duresses and things. So it is much better in the post board games. So you don't want it game 1. You kind of need it game 2. Never cut that card so fast in my life, so that will not be appearing in future builds. The Grape Shots, Burning Wishes, most of the sorceries are Burning Wish targets. So Burning Wish is your way of winning the game if something bad happens to Tendrils, which is nice. It's also just a flexible way to squeeze a few alternate angles of attack when things go wrong. So, for example, Mizzix's Mastery, you find with Burning Wish, if Yawgmoth's Will gets discarded and you decide you want Yawgmoth's Will this game, there's no real way of getting cards back to your hand from the graveyard in the deck, and that's fairly deliberate. It just opens you up even more to the Scavenging Ooze or that new double green card, Keynote Curator,
Yeah.
And Death Rat Shaman. Like all those kinds of cards punish you for playing regrowths. I think if you're just trying to kill your opponent on turn 2 every game, regrowth should be in the deck, but it makes you more exposed to hate, so I don't like it. With Mythic Mastery, gets back Gilgamesh Will. Massacre kills Hate Bears. Empty the Warrens is a good alternate threat. If you can dump it turn 2, put 10 goblins in play, that often wins, especially games 2 and 3. Culling Ritual is hilariously good on some board states. It's not essential, it's a very luxury card, but if you kill 2 or 3 hate pieces with it, it feels very good. Wheel of Fortune, I would only bring in if I'm boarding in as well, which I don't have in this build. It's just a good emergency reset button. I generally use it when things have gone wrong, and I'm like, oh, I Burning Wish, all my other things are too expensive to win, but I'm dead if I do nothing, so let's Wheel of Fortune and hope there's good cards on top.
If you're also boarding in what, sorry?
Shieldred the Apocalypse, so that's
right.
like a A+B combo that just kills them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Shieldred is a very good threat if people are not ready for it, because obviously Shieldred is a good card, everyone knows, but it's particularly good in this deck because you can draw so many cards. You can just gain so much life that people can't kill you, and it will eventually kill them. What else have we got? Molten Collapse is a card you can sideboard in, but it's also just a way to have to Archon and Emiria or whatever. Grapeshot is you never board this card in. That's always a sideboard card. The reason for that is it beats Veil of Summer. So if someone Veils of Summer you, the main deck can't really kill you, except for Bolas' Citadel Shenanigans, which are pretty hard to activate and tap it twice. It's possible, but not easy. Whereas Grapeshot kills through that, and Grapeshot also kills a lot of Hate Bears. So someone goes Collect a Roof, and you can go Burning Wish Grapeshot. That kills that in a fairly difficult way for them to stop. It's Abrupt Decay. Can't get that. Shattering Spree is obviously for shops, and Dread Fugue is the next best Thoughtseize effect.
Oh, is that what that card is? Abrupt Decay. Okay. Moxfield's done this thing where it chooses the worst possible art every single deck list we put up on this podcast. I'm glad we know what that card is now.
Out of interest with Chain of Vapor, has that been displaced by the new Gift the Frog one? I'm trying to remember what it is. Or is the because Chain of Vapor does it make a copy if you sacrifice the island?
So the way Chain of Vapor works is if you target something, the owner of that permanent can sacrifice a land, and then they get a copy of Chain of Now, Chain of Vapor is worse if you have Citadel out, because you're like, you Chain of Vapor, oh, I'll just copy it and bounce your Citadel, haha. But in practice, the games don't play out that way. Because if you have Citadel in play, you should generally be winning. I'm not saying always, but like you should probably have dealt with the hate before you start comboing off. And the benefit of Chain of Vapor is it has a ton of cool tricks with your own deck. So, for example, if you've got Lotus LED, Lotus Petal, Tendrils, Chain of Vapor, you can just play your artifact mana, Chain of Vapor, sacrifice all your own lands, bounce all your own artifacts, replay them all for Storm, and then kill your opponent with Tendrils.
Yeah.
When otherwise Tendrils would generally be pretty useless early, so it makes Tendrils a lot better. There's just tons of cool tricks you can do. Like, I'm not playing it in this build, but Mox Opal. So, if you tap Mox Opal, target that with Chain of Vapor, sacrifice it, then bounce their random hate thing, it gives you an extra mana. Between the extra mana and the extra Storm and the cool stuff options, I do think Chain is better.
Yeah, it's a bit of like a build your own paradoxical outcome type thing.
Yes, exactly.
Well, look, are there any? Is there anything else we need to know? Otherwise, I actually do have some like questions about Fringe Storm cards, which I'm really interested to hear what your takes are.
Looking at the clock, and I think you should start the questions. Otherwise, I'll rant forever.
All right, let's try and go for like quick answers. The first one is, what are your thoughts on like pseudo rituals? So like one class which I see you are playing is like your colorless ones, Grim Monolith Mana Vault, but other ones I'm thinking about are things like Tinderwall, or rituals which are conditional, like Battle Hymn, Infernal Plunge, Brightstone Ritual. Like, is there room for these, set up the empty and then go completely ballistic? So yeah, that's the first class.
So Grim Monolith and Mana Vault are only in the deck to make Tinker work. I think in the pure form of the deck, you don't play them, and I historically have not played them. So no, I wouldn't play more bad cards to make Tinker good. I think it's good enough with 12. Cards like Tinderwall, I consider Tinderwall a conventional ritual in the sense of it works with Yawgmoth's Will. That to me is a big differentiator. Like, it's like a Rite of Flame in that you can sack it and get 2 mana. So if Tinderwall wasn't awkwardly coloured, I'd actually prefer it to Rite of Flame, but its colours are awkward, so I don't play it. But I have played Tinderwall. It's fine. It's just not that powerful. The ritual that you did, I don't think you mentioned, but Culling the Weak is the real gangster ritual that one day I will make work because that card has super high upside. Um, and
That's right. That's it's
there's
like single black sack a dude make four black. Is that the
correct.
yeah?
Yes, that's
Okay.
Culling Ritual. So there is enough random idiot creatures that you could maybe make that work one day. But it's like Tinker. It does nothing when it doesn't work. And in an engine deck where every card has to contribute, it's really hard to make those cards work.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. Next question I had was, what are your thoughts on cards which are like setup only? And what I mean by that is like Wild Cantor, Strike at Reach, Vessel Volatility. Like these do add a mana, but they need to kind of like come down past the turn and then do it.
I don't historically like these. I think I sort of touched on it earlier, but any opportunity you're giving your opponent to interact with you, you should not give them. So unless the card is powerful enough, like with Grim Monolith, I will frequently run that out on turn 2 and give the opponent a chance. But it does have the mode where if I'm worried about interaction, then I can just tap it on the same turn. A lot of the cards you mentioned do not go mana positive if you don't pre-play them. And it's the same for some of these Storm Engine cards, where it's like, put counters on this card, and if you remove them, it does cool stuff.
Yeah.
Like Aetherworks Reservoir and stuff like that. I just don't think those cards meet the efficiency to be worth playing.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. Next thing, actually, I did already have a question about kill cons in main versus board, but we covered that. What about just like Wish? Like 3 mana Wish, or is it just the fact that you just only need one to get out of a tight spot?
Yeah, mana efficiency is everything. Burning Wish you can precast, Wish you can't. It's 1 mana cheaper, which is an infinity amount. The fact you can get everything is nice, but when you're putting a Wish board together, you kind of warp the deck to have sorceries in the sideboard. So, yeah, I don't even think Wish is close, to be honest.
Okay. Thoughts on like mana reducers? So like, creature versus non-creature, like Helm as opposed to like, like Rowl or Goblin Electromancer, like instant and sorcery versus like red spell, like, in Legacy, like Ruby Storm. Also, I guess modern's more Ruby Storm is more common, but like Ruby Medallion, or like, there's those old ones like Nightscape Familiar and stuff like that. Are there any, considerations on these cards?
So most of them that are color specific, like Nightscape Familiar and the Artifact Cycle for individual colors, are not efficient enough because the deck is so many different colors. Ral, I think I touched on earlier, it's one of the great tragedies of Tinker is that you can't play Tinker and Ral and make it work, in my opinion. There's another one, I think it's Baral. He's like a 1 and a colorless blue, and he's a 1/3.
Yep.
I think that sort of card starts to become a lot more appealing when you go all in on his sorcery. But those kinds of cards, in my opinion, you kind of got to sideboard them because they're just so vulnerable to removal game 1. And
Okay,
people will
right.
have so much removal. So you can build your strategy around them for post board, but your deck has to work without them being in play. Otherwise, you're not playing Eternal Magic. I think go play Modern. That format's less good.
Yeah. Okay. Another question, bonus round. Any consideration for that one?
Bonus round is quite close. I think it does make the cut if you're all in on instants and sorceries. Again, it's just Tinker forces you down a particular direction.
Yep.
I have put bonus round in real lists before, pre-Tinker, and it's okay. It gets better the more red rituals you put in your deck, like Seething Song and Rite of Fire. Not Rite of the other ones, Pyretic Ritual and Desperate Ritual.
Yep.
So you definitely can do that. It is a legal thing to do, but I think not in this specific build. But there's tons of different decks. These are just like snapshots of decks I have played at various tournaments. You're not seeing the 10 different decks I've tried at home and been like, it's just not quite efficient enough.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like I've obviously like the more deep you go into a single color, like the more the medallions and stuff end up seeming good. But obviously, in this multicolor build, it's not gonna make the cut. Other question, fast bond. Like, in a lot of these, sometimes when you're storming off and you're just exiling cards off the top, you hit lands incidentally. Is there any room for fast bond in Storm?
My response will be it's a win more card, so get good.
Okay, yep, fair enough.
Like without being overly rude about it, there's a lot of stuff in Storm which makes your life easier, which is wrong.
Okay. Are there any like other classic examples, like mistakes people are making?
I mean, people put like Jace in their deck, like the 4-mana Jace to make Doomsday easier. And I appreciate the desire to make Doomsday easier because Doomsday is really hard, but you're hamstringing yourself every time you draw Jace when you don't have Doomsday.
Right. Okay.
They're just crutch cards, and you can play them if you want, but this is not a deck that allows you to get away with making mistakes. It just mercilessly kills you whenever you make mistakes. So,
What cards like Xanted Swarm, Three Fairy, Voice of Victory, like these, like no cast in my turn effects. How good are these? How many should people be running, if any?
Oh, they're very good. I've definitely played them, not Voice of Victory specifically, but I've messed around with it. Xanted Storm I've played before. They're kind of the similar in those Duke strategies where you can bring in sort of, 2 to 3 creatures to punish people for not having removal. You don't want to bring in like 6 or 7 because then it dilutes your Storm part of the deck too much. But they're very reasonable ways if you're saying, I'm dying to blue-white control because they just have 6 counterspells. Xanted Swarm's a really good way to attack it. In this metagame, there's a lot more Grixis-style decks, which are much more aggressive and have discard, so the Xanted Swarm isn't as good against that deck. But if everyone starts playing this really dirtily control decks, then Xanted Swarm is a definite strong ally to call to battle.
And the last one I had was Rule of Law effects. Like of all things, which hate pieces for Storm. Like I've seen Storm get around cards like Rest in Peace seemingly without issue. I'm sure it did cause issues, but it doesn't look like it. But Rule of Law effects seems to be a real killer. What's the best way to deal with them from the Storm perspective?
You can't beat them, so you have to deal with them. So the best answer is something like Ottawara, because if you can get 4 lands, which is by no means a guarantee, but if you can, set that up with Ottawara on your hand as land 5, end step bounce it, then you're off to the races. That is easier said than done, though. So that's why cards like Abrupt Decay are good, because they're sort of an Ottawara for 2 mana. They can't really stop it, but it kills the Deafening Silence, which is the most playable of those cards.
And this is why I imagine Repeal is like main deck. It's for that kind of thing.
Yeah, Repeal's interesting because it's not very good with Citadel, and I annoyingly lost to, I think, Jared in the finals of the last POG because Repeal was on top of the deck after Citadel and there were no 0-drops in play. So it really hurts.
Yeah.
But you just need to have answers to these cards because people play them, and if you don't have the answer, you can't beat them.
And so earlier you mentioned that when people are playing against you, they Thoughtseize you and they have no idea what to take. What would be some rules of thumb or tips of people playing against Storm for the first time or one of the first few times that they could do to maybe get an edge over you?
The problem is it's so contextual that there's no easy answer. I can say if you take this card, you're always correct. I would lean towards the heuristic of take points. It's hard to go wrong taking the Tinker or the Black Lotus, and sort of try and figure out what I'm short on. So if I've got 3 rituals and an action spell, I should probably take the action spell. But it gets complicated. So I played a game on Wednesday at the POG Weeklies where someone Thoughtseize me, saw my hand, didn't know what to take, but I had... so it was turn 2, I think. So I was on the play. I played a land, past turn. They played something, passed. I played a land... Sorry, I didn't play land. I missed my second land drop. Cast Serum Visions, topped 1, bottomed 1. And then they thought, I think it was Duress. They Duressed me, and I showed them Yawgmoth's Will, a bunch of rituals, and an Inquisition. And they took the Inquisition. And to me, that's insane, because I've kept a 1-lander. So, I pondered on turn 1 as well. Pondered, shuffled, then Serum Visions kept 1 on top. So, it's so likely that you're going to die from the top card of my library. I guess I knew this because I've played the deck a bunch. You don't keep hands that can't do things, especially on 7 cards. You just have to take the Yawgmoth's Will in that spot. But they were like, oh, I need to protect my stuff and the game's going long. It's like, the game's not going long. I don't need my second land. The game is not going for very many turns. So
yeah, I guess it depends as well, right? Like if they saw a hand with a really desirable 2-drop, like a Helm of Awakening, maybe they're thinking, oh, he's topped the second land to get Helm. But if your hand is all 1-drops and Yorg Will, and you've topped a card, that probably screams a Stark Ritual or Lotus, right?
I think in the actual game it was a Dark Petition or some combo thing to win. But yeah, I guess those kinds of spots are difficult. I played a game, I think it was last night in VFN, where it was post-board, they'd probed me and saw I had Stormsail Scion in my hand, and I cast a Lion's Eye Diamond, and Volty was commentating, and they were like, oh, this is a Tinker line, because why else would I cast the Lion's Eye Diamond here? I should be saving it for Storm, for my Stormsail Scion. The only reason I would play this is because I'm going to tinker it, because I'd kept a card on top after the probe, which was 100% correct. But the person who I was playing against doesn't understand the deck and actually misunderstood the rules, and they thought Lion's Eye Diamond could crack to make mana and then cast a spell, which is not really how the card works. So they force of negationed the Lion's Eye Diamond, and I just went, another artifact from my hand, Tinker, kill you.
Yeah, yeah.
So like it's really difficult for new players because I totally understand how the mistakes happen. But that's kind of why the deck is complicated. It's live by the sword, die by the sword for both sides. Like the game just ends if either side makes a mistake.
Well, a shout out to fellow committee member Volta. She knows what she knows the decks as well, and obviously those sort of commentators. Good, like it is fun when you see commentary on Magic the Gathering things, and you can tell these insights. It's almost like the predicted market, of like what's about to happen, and if when it comes right, it's like yes, I'm locked in. I'm in the mind's eye of Richard. Yeah. Look, we're running a bit short on time. Normally we do questions, but you sent us a list of opinion slash hot takes. Liam, do you reckon it might be more interesting to just have Richard do the do the gauntlet on them?
Well, yeah, I mean, especially since mental misstep can't be a quick question anymore. I mean, what's the point?
I swear to God, Liam's got me in so much trouble. This is a mental misstep. Final question. I will point out to the broader community, okay? Obviously, I believe in the misstep pointing, but I've had so many people say to me, it's like, I mean, obviously, you've got this, like, a huge vendetta against this card. It's basically the entire point of the podcast. It's like, I think people are really misevaluating how much hate Liam has for this card. But, yeah.
Yeah, I'm the bad guy. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
But look, yeah. In lieu of a misstep question, Richard, do you want to give us the gauntlet on these hot takes of yours?
I just want to point out I wrote an article 10 years ago hating on mental missteps, so I'm pretty happy with the recent pointing as well. But
Oh yes.
moving on to the hot takes. So I've said that Doomsday is complicated, but it's not why the deck is hard. The deck is hard because of all the micro decisions you have to make along the way. It's like turn one, you ponder, you see some cards, they're kind of okay, but it's how do they fit into your strategy of how to win the game. And there's like two elements to it. One is the goldfishing element, like how can I assemble a win on turn 3 or turn 4, whenever I'm planning to go off. And you need to select your Storm engine. Like, am I Doomsdaying? Is this a Yawgmoth's Will game? Is this a Tinker game? And then the opponent comes into it. So what if I ponder, shuffle away my second win con, and then I get Thought Seized, they take my Tinker, how do I win the game then? What happens if they have a counterspell? What happens if they have an Orcish Bowmaster? So there's a sort of giant percentages machine where you're trying to work out, well, how likely are all these things and what is the best way to attack those problems going on all the time whenever you're casting one of the many card selection spells. And that is really the hard thing of the deck. And you don't even get to really play that game until you've figured out the Doomsday. Like, you need to know what piles work with Doomsday and what they beat before you can start pondering to set them up. So that's where the complexity comes in. And the opponent messes with all of that horribly.
Yeah. There was more than one hot take, surely.
Oh, I can keep going. I just wanted to give you the boys a chance to respond.
I agree with that. Yeah, Liam, surely you agree with this. I feel every deck is hard whenever you cast a ponder.
Yeah, strongly agree. You know what? That's why we can't point Brainstorm Mouse. It's because it's too difficult to play.
I mean, Brainstorm pointing is a philosophical question. I think the card is really fun and promotes good magic. So even if it's overpowered, I think it produces fun games. But that's very opinionated. So moving on. My next thing was I said mass draw effects are not actually that good. I think this is a big difference between Storm in Highlander versus other formats. So in your 4 formats, you get 4 Dark Ritual and 4 Cabal Ritual, and whatever Lotus Petals and Lion's Eye Diamonds, whatever rituals in that form, you get to play 4 of them. In this format, you don't get enough rituals. So you get to play all the most busted action spells in Magic. Like, Legacy would drool to have Tinker available to it. And, the Doomsday piles get a lot better when you can stick Black Lotus in them. And Yawgmoth's Will is banned for a reason. So you get to play all the busted action cards, but you don't get all the busted mana. So if you look at the Legacy Storm decks, they'll typically have something like 20 to 30 mana sources, plus lands as well, and they play a lot less lands. Whereas in Highlander, you can sort of squeeze about 12 in, unless you start putting really low-quality cards in the deck, which has its own problems. You can't get a high enough density of fast mana to make cards like Necro good. So you can cast Necro in Highlander, pay 15 life, and see like 1 or 2 rituals. Where in Legacy, you'd see like 6. So it's really hard to make those cards pay back the mana you invest in. Like, if you Wheel of Fortune, you're not at all guaranteed to draw 3 mana worth of fast rituals from your Wheel of Fortune. Like, you can, and I mentioned earlier, it's like a desperation move, but it's not a plan in the same way. Like, draw 7s can work, but it more works in Highlander when you've got like the Tolarian Academy builds and you're generating like 20 mana. Yeah. This deck doesn't generate 20 mana, it generates 8 mana and then kills you with it.
I mean, like, a good intuition for that is, even if you like Wheel of Fortune, and you got like Chrome Mox, Simian Spirit Guide, and like Desperate Ritual. Like that's like three incredibly specific cards. You're only now just mana neutral. You're not even mana positive, right? Like you need to go mana positive. You really do need everything to line up in 7 cards.
It's very difficult. Like you can do it with cost reducers. So again, that's your RALs and so on. So then it starts to get better. But yeah, I don't think they're a good primary game plan. I don't think you're insane for putting a Wheel of Fortune because that's obviously the best one in your deck as a tutor target, but I'm not about them. Also, it's not deterministic. I think earlier you touched on the deterministic nature. You always prefer a deterministic kill if you can get one, but sometimes you have to settle for non-deterministic and see what happens.
Yep.
Wheel of Fortune's kind of the pinnacle of YOLO. I hope it works out, which is not my preferred way when most of the time you can get a more guaranteed win because you've already got to battle through all the hate. It's not like Wheel of Fortune stops them discarding you or counterspelling you. It's like everything's gone right and I still don't win. Not ideal.
I do think that like if the more the deck is redundancy based, the better the wheel is. Like I've seen some like mono red storm lists where like they're playing so many impulse effects that the Wheel of Fortune is basically guaranteed to get one. Whereas your list is far more like particular. Do you know what I mean? Like every card has its own different role. And I can imagine we will be in a lot worse in that situation because, well, I mean, just, the cards are just much more diverse.
Yeah, this deck is the beautiful machine where one cog goes out of line and the whole part. There is not a lot of redundancy in a lot of these cards. It's like this card solves this specific problem.
Yeah.
All right, next.
The next one's a actual hot take. There's a
Like I said, most people are too cowardly to play this deck because the reality is, while it's lovely to Thoughtseize your opponent and know everything's right and deck the deterministic win, sometimes you've got to look at the game state and go, this is almost certainly getting countered into my opponent's untapped 2 mana post board, and you've got to jam it anyway because it gets worse for you the longer you wait. And sometimes you have to Rain of Filth and sacrifice all your lands, and there's no coming back. Like I think a lot of people have this idea that there's this safety blanket over their combo. It's like, oh, I can go for the Thoracle, and then I'll try and, Tainted Pact. But if it gets counterspelled, I can unearth it next turn. This deck takes away all the safety blankets and says, kill all your lands, then try and win. And if you're dead, you're so ultra dead. And same with Doomsday. Like, you've got to be willing to put Doomsday on the stack and look like a fool and concede. And I've done that several times. Less so these days, but it still happens. So you can make you look like a real idiot when you mess it up. And that's okay. And sort of a percentage thing as well. Like, a lot of the time post-board, you're a dog. So you've got to go, I can send it, and this is going to fail the majority of the time, and you've still got to send it. And then you've got to send it the next match, and the next match, and the next match. And it's kind of has a similarities to poker as well. Like, you can make the right decisions and die hard. Well, that's how it goes.
I mean, like, a good example of this would even be, with the Storm Scale Dragon. Like, I imagine if you've got the capacity to make 2 or 3 of these things on turn 2, like, especially if you're on the play, you've just got to go for it, right?
Oh, rip it in there. Rain of Filth away your lands and send it.
Yeah.
And then die to what they're consigned to memory and move on to the next game.
Oh, right, because of course Consign can trigger stop the Storm trigger, can't it?
Well, you get 1 4/4 dragon, but that's generally not going to do it.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, go. We'll hit us with the next one.
I've got in here 3 mana hate is too slow. So I've specifically called out some interaction that I think people over rely on against Storm. Because like a lot of the time I'm playing against people and they're like, oh, I've got all these cards for you. And they sort of fan out their sideboard. And like, these cards are really good against me. But it comes back to the lack of a plan. So, cards like Trinisphere, Ashiok, Maddening Hex. These cards are all absolute top 10 hate pieces in the game against, like, I cannot beat these cards. But they don't matter if you're dead. Because, like, if we think of a match, right? So I'm going to win game 1. I will lose game 2 a lot of the time because I'm on the draw. But then game 3, I'm on the play. And if you're hoping that your 3 mana hate piece will get to 3 mana while you're on the draw, I've got some bad news for you at statistics because you are super likely to die.
Does that mean, are you making a really conscious effort in post-board games to go off by turn 3 when you're on the play for that reason?
If I suspect my opponent has these cards, or if I saw them in game 2, I will send it very quickly if I can. And it depends on the matchup. If it's against like Grixis with counterspells and so on, I may not send it. But again, it comes back to that. Sometimes you just got to go for it, despite it being low percentage. So if I have a handful of, Thought Seizers and Sculpting, I probably won't go for it. But if I've got the full Dark Ritual hand, I will ship it. I think it was a game against Clift in the last POG coverage where I sent it. I think it was on turn 1. I hardcast Bolas' Citadel by sacrificing, I think, Lotus, Cabal Ritual, Bolas' Citadel into his untapped mana and got forced.
Yeah.
And it's like I think that was correct. Like the way my hand was structured, I had no way of things getting better for me. So you send it in there, you get forced, and I won that game 10 turns later off Yawgmoth's Will. But that was very lucky. So
It's the real it's the scrappy vintage style game, hey, where it's like everything goes wrong for both players, and it's just like we're beating each other to death with like Thunder Trap trainers, and then somebody gets the crazy card and it like reignites the whole thing.
yeah, that's the games I like the most, where it gets really scrappy, and it kind of feeds into a hot take, which I'll jump to here because I think it makes sense. It's like this deck is not always a combo deck, particularly post board. A lot of the time, it's a burn deck because your opponent starts at 20, they fetch and shock and thought seize and misstep or whatever themselves down to about 15. If you can hit them with like a Trinket Mage or a Saga token or a Thunder Trap Trainer, whatever it is, down to about 10, and you can find a way to get tendrils into your hand, they're just dead. Because you can't, like the majority of cards can't stop you just going a few rituals, tendrils. That doesn't take a Yawgmoth's Will engine, it's just casting a few spells. And all like the Collector Roots and Ashioks won't stop me if it's just cast 3 spells and tendrils you. So there's a lot of the times where people let their life go too low, and it's one of the mistakes people make. It's like, oh, I'll shock my Watery Grave in here for intimidation. Like, he won't go for it if he thinks I have 2 mana up, and maybe I will, maybe I won't. But you're paying a real cost when people shed life against the deck.
Yeah, look, that's a good insight. I'm the type of person who might have done that, but I'm now that you say that, I am thinking to myself, there have been times I've just gone ritual tendrils, and you don't consider the kind of little compromises you make on life earlier.
Yeah, the life. There's a lot of spots with Doomsday where it's like I can kill them if they're on 16, but not 18. So, and also, this led to one story I wanted to bring up. I think it was a week and a bit ago. So I'm playing against lands. I'm under Strip Wastelock, so I've only got 1 land in play. They've got like a tapped Wasteland and a random map Excavator in play. End of their turn, I crack my fetch, go get a Surveil, which I think is correct. I think you're supposed to expose yourself and try to win next turn. See a Preordain on top. My hand was Lotus, Doomsday, Serum Visions, Yawgmoth's Will, Expressive Iteration. And that's a win. They've got 2 unknown cards in hand and are tapped out. So I keep that on top, build a pile, put all the things together, and then Yawgmoth's Will, and then get Endurance and die. And then I went back through it and I'm like, oh wait, there's a pile I can build that beats Endurance, which was correct, but I missed it. But it sort of shows you just got to be able to send it. And that whole thing was structured around them being at 18. If they were at 20, the Yawgmoth's Will pile was the only way I could win. But because they were at 18, and I don't think they had a choice. I think they had to crack 2 fetches to play the game. But the difference between 20 and 16 is enormous when you're trying to Doomsday kill someone. Because 10 spells is a lot when you're trying to Doomsday. You've got your Ritual, Doomsday, Draw Spell, 5 cards is only 8 cards, which is 16. Whereas if you have to get to 20, you have to expose yourself to more cards to win.
Cool. All right, there's only a few more of these hot takes left, but I think we might have time for just 1 or 2 of them. Lay the spiciest ones on the barbecue, and
I think people keep too many cards against this deck, too many hands. People are like, again, it's the same thing as that 3 mana hate. If you can't interact by turn 2, your hand is probably not good enough, because I will kill you on turn 3 if left alone a lot of the time. So why are you keeping hands that can't win? Like, it doesn't matter if it's pretty. If it doesn't play Magic, you will die. And I think that's something people struggle against with this deck. It plays Magic, and it has a lot of interaction, but it forces you to fight in a way that people aren't used to. Forces...
Is that symmetrical? Like, is it also true of Storm players that they're keeping too many 6 and 7s? I know, for example, like Thomas Bott's like famously mulliganing way more hands in bots just on the thing of, oh look, it's just not doing anything unfair, so I'm not going to keep it. Do Storm players also need to be more aggressive with mulligans, or is the critical mass of resources really important to preserve?
It depends. So in the matchups like Grixis, where every card matters and the games do go on a bit longer, I don't mull as much. But if I'm playing like the Storm Mirror or like against Flash or any of the really fast combo decks, you've just got to mulligan to Oblivion and pray. If I'm against a deck like Jund, it's interesting because you do want to kill them quickly. Their hate can drop down, but they're also a Thoughtseize deck. So yes, you need to mulligan, but you can't be suicidal about it. But if you're playing like against Reanimator or one of the true just like speed everything matchup, then yeah, you can mull to 5 and it's fine because you just need to hit the Doomsday or the Tinker. But it is also a critical mass deck, so you can't go too far. I don't think you can really go below expect to win.
Below what, sorry?
Both below 5. I think you need 5 cards just to have like enough resources to actually do stuff.
Yep, fair enough.
What else? Oh, the next thing is sort of that rogue thing, which I think I've been talking about in various ways all episode. Is it's not so much what cards you play against the deck; it's having a plan, which I guess comes into the before you build your deck, you should be thinking about this stuff, and no one does because it's like 1% of the metagame. But people knowing what to do is far scarier than saying I'm going to add one more hate card to my deck. So it's difficult. It's this classic article from I think Richard Feldman wrote it back on Star City. And this, no one's probably heard of this. It's like 15 years old, but it's called The Dark Art of Dredgefu, and it's one of my favorite articles of Magic of all time. It basically says everyone hates Dredge, everyone hates losing to it, and people absolutely hate practicing for it. And Storm's a bit like Dredge. It forces you to fight on a totally different axis. If you're not prepared for it, you will have a lot of pain. But if people know what to do, there's a ton of interaction points. They're just different interaction points. And you can win a lot of games by going rogue and playing a different axis of attack that people aren't before.
Richard, I will say you sent us this long list of opinions and hot takes, but there's one that you keep jumping around and not saying. And I think it's probably, I don't know if it's a particularly hot take, but it will be incendiary for a lot of people. I think you just need to rip off the Band-Aid and put it out there.
Was this the Grixis one?
The Grixis one.
Okay, yes, Grixis isn't overpowered after the Tameo and Nethergrowth pointings. People are just crazy for expecting their unpolished brews to beat tuned decks piloted by good players. So this is true for Storm. It's also true for Grixis. Like Time Walks, I know the BEM guys put in a lot of work. Obviously, the Bust Cup guys put a bunch of work into Grixis. If you're not putting in that amount of effort, why are you expecting to win? Same with Storm. I've played this deck for a decade, and I've played the matchup 100 times more than a sitting deck. Why are you expecting to win if you haven't put in the work? So if your deck is just a pile of, this is my binder from cards the night before, that's fine. Like Highlander is a weird blend of competitive and casual, and you can play Highlander for whatever reasons you want. But if you're a spike that wants to win, or you just want to complain on Discord, you kind of got to pick your battles, because you can't have both.
Look, it's funny. Like there's a part of this which sounds really, really persuasive, but I've just heard too many stories from people who've done really well, where they say like, oh, and you know what? I basically just threw the deck together like at 4 a.m. the previous night, like kind of, somewhat famously, I'm sure he won't mind calling him out, like Scott, who won CanCon, there was a lot of like head scratching about, oh, but this Grixis list isn't running Tameo, like what's going on there? And the answer is just simply, I forgot, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure like the responses to something like this, these stories are the exception, not the rule. But how much, Richard, do you hear many of these stories? Are these kind of like just midnight brews, like having unprecedented success?
I think a Magic tournament is a massive variance machine, right? One tournament means almost nothing from data collection. And I think you guys have put out a bunch of good content in the Discord from like pointing announcements of like, well, here's the data, but it's super limited. And to do real statistics, we need 100 times as much. It's the same with one Magic tournament. Anyone can win. You can win a tournament with 40% win rate deck. You just have to get lucky. But I like looking at the Volti Fight Nights, which is obviously a tournament series which is on Magic Online. But it's always Jack, Jazza, and me who are winning. If you look at like the points list, we are miles ahead. And it's nothing rude. Like, it's okay to play Magic for fun. In fact, that's probably the best way to play Magic, especially Highlander where there's no professional scene. But there's a reason like the same players are on top over a long series of time, because they're playing Magic better with better decks. And even if like we're putting a deck together at 4 p.m. or 4 a.m. or whatever ridiculous hour, are we throwing it together last minute, or are we relying on a decade of experience of these archetypes of which cards play well together? You can leave Tameo out and win, but I'm very confident it's hurting your win rate quite badly. And you had to get lucky in other spots to make up for it.
I will say though, Scotty has done this like in 2 Mana Clashes and a CanCon and that most recent Wollongong event, where he's just rocked up, went to the pub in between rounds, not really even looked at the deck. Mouse just handed him a deck and he's like, yeah, okay, I'll play this. And top 8 or won the event several times now.
Well, look, maybe Scott's just got the magic touch,
Can we have like pub breaks in between rounds? Maybe that's the secret.
But no, I do think what Richard's saying is there's meaning to it. Is that there's a big difference between someone who's brewing from like not that much experience with the archetype versus someone who's like played some version of the deck so many times over so many years in different formats, and just like like it would be crazy, for example, to expect that someone brewing up Storm for the first time versus brewing up Storm from a history of playing it in Legacy, or even honestly in a history of playing it in Cube, that there is some of those transferable intuitions, which ultimately craft, yeah, like just cards which work together well and stuff like that.
Yeah, very
Just to finish the hot takes, watching other people play Storm tilts me to no end. I cannot survive the decisions some people make. Without saying any names, I struggle sometimes watching people resolve Ponder with the deck.
All right, well, if you're a Storm player who's played on coverage, Richard has called you out, okay?
That's right. I have. I also make mistakes on coverage, so it's not like I'm immune. And I cringe at my own mistakes too, which is just a function of the deck's release. But
Yeah.
I do struggle, and I'm like, no, I would never make that play. What are you doing?
Well, look, that's Storm, isn't it? It's high reward, but high risk. And with that, I think it's probably a good time to wrap. Liam, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, nothing for me. But thank you very much for coming on and speaking to us, Richard. I'm pretty afraid of all the Storm decks that people might try up and play in the weeklies now if they listen to this.
I hope I provided sufficient hot takes and incendiary material for good content.
Yeah,
well, look, they'll probably just play Grixis instead, let's be real.
Yeah. But yeah, look, guys, thanks for listening, and obviously thanks, Richard, for coming on. I genuinely feel like I learned a lot listening to having this discussion, and that's really good because I also want to improve as a player as well. And sometimes it really knowing your enemy is just one of the most important parts. Guys, if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to contribute and come on, you've got some experience with the deck or a brew, please reach out to Liam and I. We're always looking for new guests. Likewise, please follow us on Spotify, follow us on YouTube. Every view counts in the non-existent streaming career we're trying to create. But mostly we're just happy to have interesting people on with interesting decks, and we hope you enjoy the content too.